So today I want to contribute a bit to that debate by asking and then also attempting to answer two questions. Firstly, how do we build a sustainable energy future? And what can a company, an energy company like Shell, do to contribute to that future? And over the next 25 minutes or so, I'll do a number of things. Firstly, I will briefly describe some of the key forces that I see shaping the global energy system at the moment. Secondly, I'll outline a few of the ways I believe policymakers could act to build a sustainable energy system, one that limits the potential threats of climate change. And then finally, I'll describe how we at Shell are contributing to a lower carbon, higher energy future that the world needs, and explore some of the steps we need to take together to make it possible. So then, what are some of the factors changing and shaping that future? Now, for one thing, global energy demand is rising and will continue to rise. There are already more than twice as many people on the planet as when I was born 56 years ago. The world population is expected to grow to from roughly 7 billion today to 9 billion by the middle of the century, and by which time an increasing number of us, actually 3 and 4, will be living in cities. And as the number of people grow, so will their desire for electricity, a TV set, a fridge, a chance to travel, and that's particularly the case in emerging economies like India and China. Now, the International Energy Agency, or IEA, believes that demand for energy could double by 2050 from its baseline just a few years ago. And the IEA also says that meeting that demand will require an average annual spend of more than $2 trillion between now and 2035. So that's investment in the extraction, the transport, refining of oil and gas, power generation, energy efficiency, etc. So that means investing roughly 3 times the entire US military annual budget, 120 times the annual NASA budget every year for the next 20 years. So meeting energy demand is a massive challenge. But so too is the need to tackle the real and growing threat that climate change poses. Because as things stand, according to both the IEA and the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we will have to work very hard to limit warming to 2 degrees centigrade, that is. Sorry for thinking in European terms here. Rising demand for energy and concerns over climate change are clearly 2 of the most powerful influences shaping our energy system today. But what are some of the other factors at work? So, new oil and gas from shale rock have important implications, of course, and not just for North America, but for the global energy system as a whole. Oil production here in the Bakken oil field in North Dakota, for example, recently reached 1 billion barrels a day. And the opening up of new resources, not just here, but in places like Latin America, in the Arctic, will influence where and how energy is traded and transported for decades to come. And of course, geopolitics will also play a crucial part, as ever, with the potential to impact supply and witness what's going on in many places today, like the Ukraine, Iraq, and the South China Sea. And we'll see the continuing influence of new technologies on the way we access and produce energy. The efficiency of oil and gas production will continue to improve, as it has, and renewables like wind and solar and hydrogen and bioenergy will continue to increase their share of the energy mix as they become more advanced and more cost-effective. A rising demand for cleaner, more affordable energy, the shale revolution, more renewable energy, geopolitical strife, and of course climate change, just a few of the forces shaping our energy system. But what's the collective long-term impact of all of those different forces on the way we produce and consume energy? Well, Shell Scenarios team last year published a report mapping out 2 hypothetical energy futures called mountains and oceans. Now, they're not predictions, but they are plausible scenarios based on very detailed modeling and an enormous use in in decision-making that we do within the company. So one scenario, the mountain scenario, imagines that power remains concentrated in the hands of economic and political decision makers. Top-down policy making will result in more progress on renewables, on hydrogen, and it will also lead to the steady replacement of coal by cleaner burning natural gas. Gas actually will become the backbone of the energy system by the 2030s. There's also quite a quick progress on carbon capture and storage, the technology that can capture carbon emissions at power stations and other plants and store them safely deep underground. Now, in the world of oceans, by contrast, power becomes increasingly devolved away from governments and policymakers. And this spurs innovation and economic growth, which is good, but it also slows consensus building in other areas. And we see slower development of natural gas infrastructures, a greater and more sustained role of coal. And we also see a late shift, maybe as a bit of an overreaction, to energy-efficient infrastructures and CCS, and a very late reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Now, I won't go into further details on the two scenarios, but for today's purposes, two key observations emerge from both the mountains and the ocean scenarios. First is that governments alone are unlikely to be able to manage a shift to a sustainable energy system. That essential task will require close cross-sector collaboration between governments, business and civil society. And collaboration will be essential both to get the job done and to ensure that collective action is comprehensive and balanced. And the second observation is equally simple. Despite the significant advances on emissions imagined in the mountains and the ocean scenarios, and in line with IEA and IPCC predictions, unless there is a major shift in how we produce and consume energy, there is only a very small chance of the world limiting warming associated with climate change to 2 degrees Celsius. But let me turn now to the crucial role of energy in powering progress. The potentially devastating impact of climate change, if unchecked, is a concern for all of us. But is there a danger of allowing that concern to obliterate the energy story? Have we forgotten the extraordinary benefits we derive from access to energy, the role that energy plays in the lifeblood of human existence? When it comes to discussing energy and climate change, there's a temptation for companies like Shell to play it safe, to avoid the risk of a backlash. But that doesn't serve anyone's interest. I believe that global companies like Shell have a responsibility to society to speak up, to inject pragmatism into a discussion that is too often shaped by misinformation and conjecture, frankly speaking. And because it sometimes feels like energy itself has become a dirty word, that we have forgotten the extraordinary benefits so many of us have enjoyed because of unprecedented access to energy. It's too easy, it seems, to forget the essential contribution energy makes to enterprise, to communication, to quality of life. Energy powers economies, and without it, the lights go out. Without energy, our lives would be almost unrecognizable. Yet, worldwide, 3 billion people still lack access to modern energy, the modern energy that many of us here take for granted. According to the World Bank, more than 500 million people in Africa have no access to energy, to electricity. 10 million small and medium-sized enterprises in Africa are struggling to grow because of lack of power. The entire African continent, with a population of more than 1 billion people, has a total power generating capacity of about 80,000 megawatts. That's roughly the same as the combined capacity of New York State and Pennsylvania. Access to energy isn't just about whether our household can have a television or an air conditioning. In Africa, as in as much of the world outside Africa, access to energy is a difference between prosperity and poverty, sometimes between sickness and death. And I'm concerned that the terms of the debate around climate change have become so entrenched that the assumptions of that debate are too simplistic and sometimes flawed. The reality is that historically new energy sources have taken around 30 years to establish even a 1% share of the market. The scale and the cost of the energy infrastructure are simply too large to expect anything else. Today, wind and solar combined provide less than 1% of global primary energy. It took 30 years to get there. If they're to grow, if they're to deliver hundreds of millions from poverty, the world's economies can't wait. The simple truth is, for an energy system to be truly sustainable, it doesn't need just to be lower carbon, it simply needs to be higher energy. Building that system is going to involve a lot of effort by a lot of people. The UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon recently observed, in our increasing interconnected world, vision and ambition must be advanced by a diverse and dynamic public-private partnership. Together, we can leverage our strength, multiply our means, and shift the global climate trajectory. Ban Ki-moon's words. Now, I want to add my voice to that of Secretary General Ban. I would like to find ways for Shell to play a greater role in closer coalition of governments, business, and civil society, one defined by better mutual understanding and by dialogue. As to exactly how it might work, it's very early days yet. I know there's a lot of work to do to make it happen. But here's a glimpse of what such a coalition approach might look like. And you may be surprised to hear that it's not informed by things happening here or in Europe. In recent years, Shell has worked closely with the Chinese government's Development Research Center, the DRC, to help map out a sustainable energy future for China. Our two-year joint study identified the key challenges facing the country and proposed very, very detailed, pragmatic solutions. Support for innovation, electricity and gas reforms, the liberalization of energy prices, carbon trading, cleaner mobility, and more resource-efficient urban development, all things that have since been set in motion. A new joint study is examining China's gas development strategy. We just kicked it off a few months ago, including looking at supply-side measures to accelerate domestic production and demand to promote the use of gas in China. Now, what are some of the benefits of those two collaborative projects? A greater role for clean-burning natural gas, more resource-efficient urban planning, improved energy efficiency, etc. Now, China is, of course, a special case. But it is, if this sort of cross-sector collaboration became the norm and not the exception, wouldn't our collective energy future look a whole lot brighter? Now, my company has a long track record of working in partnership with others. We have numerous energy-related joint ventures and partnerships all over the world, with governments, national oil and gas companies, and many other firms. And we have close ties with universities like MIT and Tsinghua in Beijing, and we have collaborative partnerships with a range of leading environmental, non-governmental organizations. And whenever we plan a new major project or extend an existing one, we work closely with NGOs to reduce the environmental impact. And we also work very closely with local communities to enable them to share in the benefit of our activities in terms of creating jobs and developing skills that will boost local economies. In other words, we do understand the value of building long-lasting cross-sector partnerships. And we, along with others, have much to learn if we are to collaborate on an unprecedented scale required. But I believe there is a constructive and a credible role that my company can play in this space. And as the CEO, I have been determined to lead that effort.